Bizim buraya birini sürgün etmişler.
Sahi ne oluyor? Jandarmalar gelen giden.
Siz bu adamı anlamıyorsunuz.
Kimse korkudan yanına yaklaşamayacak.
Efendim, bizler talebeliğe kabul edilmek, kalemlerimizle hizmet etmek istiyoruz.
Bu adam mıymış?
He ya, ne zaman diyorlardı?
Bediuzzaman.
Yaz kardeşim. Birinci mektup, birinci soru.
Yakında bunu da buradan uçururlar.
Silahları nereye sakladınız? Söylesene be adam!
Bu işin oluru kalmadı.
Bir yol var efendim.
Arapça ezan okunurken camiye gireceksiniz. Suçüstü edip karakola getirin.
Ben okuma yazma bilmem komutanım. Ne işim olur kağıtla?
Efendim, bu imtihanı atlatabilmemiz için duanıza ihtiyacımız var.
Hanım acele et. Bitmesi gereken yazılarım var.
Kardeşim, üstadımızı zehirlediler. Ölümle pençeleşmekte. Kardeşlerin dualarını istirham ederiz.
Allah'ın Sadık Kulu. 4 Kasım'da sinemalarda.
Okay, so today we're gonna really dive deep into this fascinating period in history. It was all about the exile of Said Nursi in this small Turkish town, Barla. It was between 1927 and 1934.
Yeah, and you know what's really cool about this deep dive is that we're not just looking at, dry academic texts.
Right.
We're actually going to be looking at this film
Yeah.
called Allah'ın Sadık Kulu-Barla, which translates to God's faithful servant in Barla. And it's this really interesting film. It's a dramatization, but it's based on actual events that happened during Nursi's life.
I mean, picture this. It's 1927. You have this scholar, Said Nursi, and he's basically been labeled a threat by the government. And they send him to this tiny little rural community, Barla. And of course, the local villagers are all curious. They're a little apprehensive, maybe.
Yeah, who is this guy?
Exactly. But at the same time, you have the authorities. They're watching him like a hawk.
Oh, yeah. Very suspicious.
It's like this huge contrast. The government thinks he's so dangerous. But then when you see him interacting with the people of Barla, it just seems so different.
Yeah, there's this real tension there right from the beginning. And I think the film does a good job of setting that up.
It does.
And I think what we want to do today is really kind of unpack what happens during this time.
Yeah.
What were the key events? What are the big themes?
Right.
And how did Nursi's influence actually start to spread when he's basically in this isolated place?
Yeah, it's almost counterintuitive.
Exactly.
So where do we even begin?
I think a good place to start is with Nursi himself.
Okay.
How is he portrayed in the film?
Right.
What kind of person is he?
Yeah, because one of the first things we see about him is this incredibly strong sense of self-reliance. He arrives in Barla as an exile, and he doesn't really have anything, and yet he insists on paying for everything.
Like everything.
Even when the commissioner, and the villagers are offering him food and shelter, just out of the goodness of their hearts.
Yeah, it's like he almost refuses to accept charity.
He does. And it's interesting because in that situation, you might expect someone to just, take the help. He's clearly in a very vulnerable position.
Absolutely.
But for Nursi, it was like this matter of principle.
I see.
It wasn't just about being practical.
Right.
It was about his beliefs, about his responsibility before God. And it really set him apart from the very beginning.
It makes you think about, what would I do in that situation?
Totally. And it actually connects to another thing that the film really highlights, which is this shift in Nursi's life.
Oh, okay.
From being very solitary, very much on his own, to really focusing on serving other people.
Interesting.
There's this point where he actually says that being exiled to Barla was like a punishment for him. Well, he says it was for a time when he was too focused on himself. And that now he was being sent to serve others.
That's a big shift in perspective.
It is. And I think it marks a real turning point in his life and in the direction of his work.
I mean, we think about the bigger picture, his time in Barla is when he really started to develop his major work, the Treatise of Light.
Right. Risale Nur.
Exactly. And you see these little hints of it in the film, like images of the sycamore tree where he would go to contemplate and the simple house where he lived, they almost become these symbols of the beginning of this huge intellectual and spiritual project.
It's powerful imagery, for sure.
It is.
And the film doesn't just focus on the abstract ideas,
No.
It also shows these really human moments, especially his interactions with children.
Oh, I love those scenes.
There's that one where he sees some boys hurting an animal,
And
and he very gently intervenes and teaches them about compassion.
that's nice.
And then there's the scene where he's teaching Surah Al-Ikhlas to young Mustafa. So patient.
It really shows a different side to him than, this dangerous figure that the government was so afraid of. It humanizes him.
It does. And I think those smaller interactions are really important.
Yeah.
Because they show how Nursi connected with people on this really basic human level.
I see what you mean.
It wasn't about him being this authority figure. It was
Yeah.
about guidance
Right.
and understanding,
Yeah.
even with the kids.
I bet that's part of why his ideas were able to spread so effectively later on.
Oh, absolutely.
He could connect with people.
So speaking of his ideas, how did those actually start to spread in Barla?
Well, the film does a great job of showing this process of oral dictation.
Right.
Because Nursi himself apparently had some difficulty writing by hand.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So what he would do is he would articulate his thoughts, and then local people like Shamla Tefik and Suleiman would write them down.
It was like a collaboration.
It was. And what's really fascinating about that is it wasn't this top-down, here's the information kind of thing.
Yeah.
The villagers were really active participants in capturing and preserving Nursi's teachings.
Right. They weren't just stenographers.
No, they were engaged with the ideas as they were being formed.
But of course, this whole writing activity did not go unnoticed by the authorities.
Oh, no.
There's this scene where one of the officials is like completely baffled that Nursi isn't writing himself. And he's expressing this like deep fear of Nursi's growing influence, even without him directly picking up a pen.
Yeah, they were paranoid.
They were. It's almost comical how worried they were about the power of his words.
Well, I guess from their perspective, they saw him as a threat.
Yeah.
And they were trying to maintain control.
Totally.
But what they really underestimated was the power of spoken word.
And the dedication of Nursi's followers.
Yeah, exactly. And the film goes on to show how resourceful they were in sharing these handwritten manuscripts.
Yeah. It was like this secret network.
It was. It almost reminds me of like samizdat literature
Oh, yeah, that's a good
in
comparison.
Soviet Russia.
We see this chain of copying and distribution with people like Sabriya Hafiz Ali, Husrev. They even use this analogy of an operator.
An operator.
Yeah, with Sabri being like the central hub for receiving and then passing on these handwritten pages.
Wow. And what about the content of those writings? What kind of impact were they having on people?
Well, the film really emphasizes how profound an impact these writings had on the lives of the people who read them.
Okay.
They were offering explanations of faith that resonated with people,
Yeah.
both intellectually and emotionally.
Right.
There's this quote in the film about the Rizai Nur repairing the walls of faith. And that really captures how it provided this sense of spiritual and intellectual nourishment. So as this movement's gaining momentum, you also have this very intense government surveillance and opposition that Nursi's facing.
Right. It wasn't easy for him.
No. I mean, there's constant monitoring by gendarmes, local authorities, all fueled by suspicion and fear. We see the governor constantly asking about him,
Yeah.
trying to track his movements.
And the writings.
And the writings. They tried so hard to isolate him.
But did it work?
Well, the film shows that their attempts to completely isolate Nursi ultimately failed.
Really?
The villagers were drawn to his wisdom, his character.
I mean, that makes sense. He sounds like a very charismatic person.
He does.
So what happened? Did they eventually give up trying to suppress him?
It wasn't that simple. The film actually hints at some pretty disturbing things,
Like what?
like using informants,
Oh, wow.
and even considering more extreme measures.
Like what? Poisoning him.
Yeah. It really shows how far they were willing to go to silence him.
That's scary.
It is. And we also see the consequences for his followers.
Yeah. What happened to them?
People like Shemli Tefik were arrested
Wow.
and questioned just for being involved in writing down and sharing his teachings.
Just for that.
Yeah. It was risky business.
It sounds like it. And what about that scene at the mosque?
Oh, right.
Where they were reciting prayers in Arabic.
That was a really tense moment.
What happened?
Well, the government had these policies about language.
Right, like trying to promote Turkish
Exactly.
and limit the use of Arabic.
And so reciting prayers in Arabic was seen as an act of defiance.
I see.
So people were arrested.
For praying.
It shows the clash between religious tradition and the secular state.
It's complicated.
It is. But despite all this pressure and opposition,
Yeah.
what really stands out is the resilience of both Nursi himself and his followers.
That's encouraging.
It is. He always interpreted events through this spiritual lens.
How so?
He talked about destiny
Yeah.
and about these trials having a purpose.
That's a powerful way to look at things.
It is. And then you see this community of believers forming around him.
People finding strength and meaning in his teaching.
Exactly. Like Hulusi and Huzrev,
They were willing to travel long distances
even while fasting.
just to be near him.
Yeah. It shows the power of his message.
It does. And the film actually draws some interesting parallels between Nursi's impact starting in this small village and the beginnings of other major religious movements.
Right. Like even hinting at Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Yeah.
It's subtle, but it's there.
It's really highlighting this long-term potential of faith, even when it starts from very humble beginnings.
And the film really emphasizes Nursi's focus on the afterlife and not sacrificing eternal rewards for worldly pleasures.
Makes sense given the persecution he was facing.
Right. It provided a lot of solace and perspective for his followers.
It must have.
Now, his time in Barla did eventually come to an end.
Yeah, he was moved to Isparta.
Right. But the film makes it clear that his influence didn't disappear.
No.
In fact, it grew. His writings had taken root, and a really dedicated community had formed around his teachings.
So it was more than just a geographical location for him.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive on Said Nursi's time in Barla as shown in the film, what are some of the key takeaways for you?
Well, I think for me is this amazing story of how, despite being in exile under constant watch, this period in Barla was incredibly productive.
Yeah.
It's where the Treatise of Light was born.
Wow.
And its initial spread was all thanks to these ordinary people
Amazing.
who were so dedicated to preserving and sharing his ideas.
Yeah, the power of community.
Right.
I think the film does a really good job of showing that.
It does.
And also the resilience of faith in the face of adversity.
Absolutely.
It's a powerful message.
It is.
Any other thoughts?
Well, it also makes you think about how seemingly isolated individuals can have such a huge impact.
Yeah.
You know, here's Nursi in this remote village under surveillance.
Right.
And yet he manages to start this movement.
A movement that continues to this day.
Exactly.
And it all started with handwritten notes passed from person to person.
Almost like this underground network of knowledge.
It really makes you think about the power of ideas and the human desire for connection,
And how that desire can't be easily suppressed.
no matter how hard they try.
Yeah. It's something to ponder for sure.
Definitely something to think about.